Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Tom's Gadget Garage. In today's video, by popular demand, we're going to be doing a three-way comparison between the Segway Ninebot Max G2, the NIU KQi 300X, and the Apollo Go. Now, all three of these scooters are in the commuter scooter segment. They all have relatively similar size batteries and are within about a couple $100 of each other, so a comparison is absolutely warranted. So over the last several months, many of you have reached out asking which one of these scooters is the right one to buy. And the short answer is it depends on what your needs and use cases are, because I could actually recommend each one of these scooters to somebody different depending on what those needs are. Now, I actually purchased each one of these scooters with my own money over the course of the last year and have been spending a lot of time putting these through a series of rigorous tests. And since then, I've put hundreds of miles on each of these scooters, so I've got a pretty good feel of where these stand relative to each other. So the goal of this video is to provide you with all the information you need to make an informed buying decision. So I'm going to do my best to give you as much information on each of these three scooters as possible. We'll go on the comparisons as well as the details of each of the tests, including the range test, the hill climb test, speed, acceleration tests. We'll go over lighting, comfort, and suspension, including the new slow-mo look of how each of these suspensions functions on these scooters. Now, at the end of this video, if you found this content to be helpful in making your purchasing decision, if you use the affiliate links as well as coupon codes in the description below, they absolutely help fund this channel and keep the wheels moving on future reviews. So thank you in advance. Now, without further delay, let's jump into the details. Now, the first comparison that we're going to look at today is going to be pricing. Now, I generally don't like to mention pricing in my videos because they're often subject to change. So what I mentioned today may not be the pricing that we have, 2 months from now. But as of the recording of this video, the low-cost option is going to be the Segway Ninebot Max G2 at $899.99. Next up is going to be the KQi 300X, which sells for around $930. And then, of course, we have the higher-priced Apollo Go, which currently sells for about $1,100. So, as of today, in terms of pricing, our winner is the Segway Ninebot Max G2, followed by the NIU KQi 300X. Now, if portability is going to be an important factor in determining which one of these scooters to purchase, then weight is probably going to be near the top of your list, especially if you're going to be lugging these scooters around, taking up flights of stairs, and all that fun stuff. So one thing that I've noticed that some of you have pointed out is the weights of these scooters aren't always exactly the same as what the manufacturers claim. So I went ahead and got an industrial shipping scale so that we can weigh each and every scooter that we review on this channel. And here's where these scooters weigh in. First up is our heavyweight champion, the Segway Ninebot Max G2, weighing in at 53.7 pounds, or approximately 24.3 kilograms. The next heaviest on the list is going to be the Apollo Go, which is 49.4 pounds, or approximately 22.4 kilograms. And finally, the lightest of the bunch, just by a hair, is the NIU KQi 300X, which weighs in at 49.2 pounds, or approximately 22.3 kilograms. So the NIU KQi 300X as well as the Apollo Go are very similar in weight. It's the Ninebot Max G2, that's the heavy one here of the group. So in terms of weight, our winner is the NIU KQi 300X, followed by the Apollo Go. The next category that we're going to look at is going to be top speed. Now, generally speaking, commuter scooters are not known for their high-end speeds. They're known for maximizing value while keeping price to a minimum, as well as maximizing range. But if speed is going to be a factor for you, there are some differences between these three scooters, and here they are. So starting with the Segway Ninebot Max G2, according to the Draghi GPS performance monitor, we were actually able to attain a maximum speed of 22 miles an hour, which is approximately 35.4 kilometers per hour. Next up is the NIU KQi 300X. In our test, we were able to attain 24 miles an hour, which is approximately 38.6 kilometers an hour. And finally, the speed demon of the group is the Apollo Go. We were able to hit 27 miles an hour, or approximately 43.5 kilometers per hour. Now, keep in mind that I'm doing all of my testing here in the United States. I do know that, in Europe and some other places in the world, there are restrictions on speed. So depending on where you're at, you may not be able to attain these speeds. So in terms of top speed, our winner is going to be the Apollo Go at the 27 miles an hour, followed by the NIU KQi 300X with its 24 mile an hour performance. The next category that we're going to look at is going to be acceleration. So for those of you who are always in a hurry, want to get from point A to point B, and don't have the patience to wait to get to top speed, acceleration is probably going to be an important factor for you. And, there are going to be some differences between each of these scooters in terms of how fast they're able to attain different speed benchmarks, as well as their stated top speed. Now, once again, we did measure acceleration with the Draghi GPS performance monitor, which ensures that we have the most accurate data available. So looking at the acceleration data starting from 0 to 20 miles an hour, the Apollo Go got there in 6.73 seconds, followed by the NIU KQi 300X at 8.03 seconds, and then the Ninebot Max G2 at 9.79 seconds. If we look at 0 to 22 miles an hour, which is the max speed for the Ninebot Max G2, the Apollo Go came in at 8.14 seconds, the KQi 300X at 9.36 seconds, and the Ninebot Max G2 at 13.35 seconds. So considerably slower than the leader in that segment, the Apollo Go. The next speed threshold that we're going to be looking at is a 0 to 24 miles an hour, which of course is the top speed for the KQi 300X. And for this one, the Max G2 will be bowing out because it's got a top speed of 22 miles an hour. So looking at 0 to 24, Apollo Go got there in 9.69 seconds, and the KQi 300X got there in 11.19 seconds. And that final category, 0 to 27, is going to be the Apollo Go getting there in 17 seconds. Now, the important thing to note about the Apollo Go getting to 27 is that it gets to 25, 26 miles an hour considerably faster. It's just that last stretch to get to that top speed does take a little bit longer. But as you can see, in all categories, the Apollo Go is the class leader. Now, that shouldn't come as much of a surprise because the Apollo Go is a dual motor scooter. It is capable of cranking out upwards of 1,500 watts of peak power, and when you compare it to the 1,000 watts of peak power that you get with the NIU KQi 300X as well as a Ninebot Max G2, you can see why it would do better in acceleration. But with all that being said, the NIU KQi 300X did a very good job in keeping up with the Apollo Go. Most of the time it was about a second and a half behind, whereas the Max G2 did fall behind quite a bit in each of those categories, but it is a very comfortable ride, which we'll be getting into momentarily. So for this test, we've got the winner as the Apollo Go and the runner-up as the NIU KQi 300X. Alright, so the next category that we're going to look at is going to be range. Now, this is going to be particularly important for people looking at using their scooters for commuting purposes, especially over long distances. Now, in order to keep things as fair as possible, we did test each of these scooters on the exact same course and set the maximum speed for each at 20 miles an hour to eliminate as many variables as possible. And as with some of our previous tests, there is some variability in the results, so let's look at the data now. Alright, so the first scooter that we're going to look at is the KQi 300X, and on that test we were able to reach 26.3 miles on a single charge with an average moving speed of 15 miles an hour. Now, this was a pretty surprising result because of the three scooters, the KQi 300X actually has the smallest battery at 13 amp hours, whereas the other two have 15 amp hour batteries. Another thing to mention that might have helped out with this range test is that the NIU KQi 300X has a 48 volt system, whereas the other two have 36 volt systems. Alright, so next on the list is the Ninebot Max G2, and with that we were able to get 22 miles with an average moving speed of 13.6 miles an hour. And finally, we've got the Apollo Go, which got the least amount of range on this test at 19.2 miles at an average moving speed of 14 miles an hour. Now, once again, keep in mind the Apollo Go is a dual motor scooter, so you've got two motors running instead of one. So generally speaking, those dual motor scooters are going to get less range than their single motor commuter counterparts. So if range is going to be important for you, the NIU KQi 300X came on top on this test, followed by the Segway Ninebot Max G2. Now, the next category that we're going to look at is going to be hill climbability. Now, keep in mind, we are comparing a dual motor scooter with two single motor scooters, but they all compete within the same space, so a comparison is absolutely warranted. So if you live in an area with lots of hills, hill climb performance is probably going to be near the top of your list. The last thing you want to do is get a scooter that's not capable of climbing the hills you intend to ride up. And the last thing you want to do is be pushing a scooter on the side of the road up a hill. Definitely not a fun scenario at all whatsoever. So better to make the right choice now rather than suffer the consequences later. So, starting with the Apollo Go, it is a dual motor scooter with dual 350 nominal watt motors that are each capable of cranking out upwards of 750 watts of power for a total combined 1500 watts of peak power. And you can definitely see that power in our top speed as well as acceleration tests, and we also saw that in the hill climb tests. Where some of the other scooters, may have struggled at points getting up the mountain, the Apollo Go excelled. Now, going up the mountain, it's about 9.5 miles up and then 8.5 miles back down, and we try and get to 3 lookout points. Now, full disclosure, with the Apollo Go, we made it to 2 out of the 3 lookout points, not because of an inability to climb the hills, but because there were some concerns about battery life along the entire distance of that test. So I was a little more conservative with things, but we were able to make it to 2 out of 3 lookout points with ease. So if hill climb is going to be a factor, the Apollo Go is definitely a strong contender. Now the next scooter that we're going to look at is the Segway Ninebot Max G2, which of course is a single motor scooter that has 450 watts of nominal power and is capable of cranking out upwards of 1000 watts of peak power. I have covered this scooter extensively on this channel early on over the course of approximately 15 videos. Doing multiple end-to-end reviews, covering all the major firmware updates as well as the impacts on performance from those. And what I can tell you is that, when I first got this scooter, I was able to make it up all 3 lookout points without any issue at all whatsoever. Super impressive performance. But early on when this scooter was released, there were some issues with overheating, some phantom braking, some other things. And so Segway had addressed those with firmware updates. Now, the issues did get resolved, but unfortunately some of those firmware updates did come with some impacts, to performance. And so I can still make it up to all 3 lookout points. It's just for that last lookout point, I have to push the scooter up the last 150 feet or so, which happens to be the steepest part. So generally speaking, the Max G2 is a very good hill climber for light to moderate hills, but it doesn't have the same hill climbing performance as the Apollo Go. And the last scooter that we're going to look at for this hill climb test is going to be the KQi 300X. This scooter has 500 nominal watts of power, so 50 more than the Ninebot Max G2, and it's also capable of cranking out the same 1000 watts of peak power. Now I'll tell you what, this scooter does have that 48 volt system, and that makes all the difference in the world, because at no point did this scooter struggle with climbing the hills. I was actually able to make it up to the 3 lookout points with ease. Now, we did run into one issue near the top with the throttle. We got some kind of a throttle hull sensor error, and maybe that was me being a little too aggressive with the throttle and extending that twist throttle past its normal range, because we did get that error. It shut down power to the scooter pretty abruptly. But, we stopped, we confirmed the error, we turned the scooter off, turned it back on, and we were back in business. So one thing to keep in mind with that scooter is it does have that twist throttle, so you want to be careful when twisting that and don't twist it too far. But anyways, the KQi 300X made it to the top with ease. In fact, we actually tested out sport mode at one point on one of the steeper sections, and that thing just flew right through it. So surprisingly, we've got a single motor commuter scooter that does exceptionally well at climbing hills. So looking at the hill climb performance of all 3 of these scooters, our top position is going to go to the Apollo Go, followed closely by the NIU KQi 300X. Now the next category that we're going to be looking at, which is going to be particularly important for those looking to maximize comfort, is going to be the suspension. Now all 3 of these scooters do have suspension in some way, shape, or form. The Apollo Go as well as the Segway Ninebot Max G2 both have full suspensions, whereas the NIU KQi 300X has a suspension only in the front. So if you're going to be riding on, bumpy terrain, having that suspension is absolutely going to go a long way in helping ensure a comfortable ride. Now the first scooter that we're going to look at is the Segway Ninebot Max G2, which of course is a full suspension scooter. It's got a hydraulic suspension up front as well as dual coil springs in the rear. And I have to say that the Ninebot Max G2 is probably the gold standard of all commuter scooters. I have yet to ride a commuter scooter with a better suspension feel than the Max G2. Segway literally hit it out of the park, hit it out of multiple parks with this scooter in terms of ride comfort. So really impressed with that. You can ride on, rough asphalt and pavement. You could ride off the beaten path on hard-packed, rutted roads, and this thing does it all. So if you're looking at maximizing comfort, the Ninebot Max G2 is definitely a scooter to seriously consider. The next scooter that we're going to look at is the Apollo Go, which is also a full suspension scooter. It just does suspension in a little bit different way. It's actually got a non-hydraulic coil spring suspension up front, as well as a spring-loaded rubber cartridge in the rear, which sounds a little bit weird, but is actually surprisingly comfortable. So when you're riding around, average roads, lumps and bumps, hard-packed dirt, it handles those exceptionally well. Not as comfortable as a Segway, but still a very comfortable scooter. And finally, we've got the KQi 300X, which is the only scooter we're looking at today that doesn't have a full suspension. What NIU has opted to do instead is put a forked hydraulic suspension up front and no suspension in the back. Now, one thing to call out is that it does have larger tire size at 10.5 inches, which does help absorb some of that impact both up front and the back. When it comes to scooters with suspension either only in front or only in back, I prefer scooters that have suspension in front because that's where your control is. That's what the handlebars are attached to. So when you're going over particularly aggressive stuff, it's very nice to have that dampening up front so you don't lose control of those handlebars. So overall, I would say that hydraulic suspension does an exceptional job of dampening impact at the front of the scooter. Thing is, you feel some of that in the rear, so not as comfortable as the Apollo Go or the Ninebot Max G2. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some clips of the suspension of each of these scooters in action. We'll start off with the full speed clips as well as the ultra slow motion 240 frame per second versions of these. And I just want you to pay particular attention to the front suspension as well as the rear on these scooters and how they approach the obstacle, as well as the importance of having pneumatic air-filled tires, because those do play a big role in dampening some of the impacts that you might go over on a day-to-day basis. So I'll play that now. So there you go. That was each of the scooters going over an obstacle at 15 miles an hour in ultra slow motion. Let me know what you think in the comments below, but here are my thoughts. Looking at the Ninebot Max G2, it does a really good job with that front hydraulic suspension at clearing the obstacle, but the rear suspension is where it's all at. That thing was just flying, lots of range on that. And if you look at the back deck of the scooter, it barely moves as it clears that obstacle because those coil springs do such a good job at dampening that impact. That's why it's such a comfortable scooter. We did see some of that with the Apollo Go, a little bit to a lesser extent. And if we look at the KQi 300X, that front hydraulic suspension has got a lot of travel, so you can absolutely see that compression as it clears the obstacle. The back of the scooter, of course, doesn't have that suspension, so you're relying more heavily on those 10.5-inch air-filled tires. With the KQi 300X, you definitely feel more of the impact in the rear. So maybe in future iterations of this scooter, if they add a rear suspension, then it's going to be a really strong contender in the comfort category. So still comfortable, but not as comfortable as the Apollo Go and the Ninebot Max G2. So the winner in this particular test is going to be the Ninebot Max G2, followed by the Apollo Go. The next category that we're going to look at is going to be lighting, and this is going to be particularly important if you're going to be riding around at night. So we'll start with the Segway Ninebot Max G2. Now this particular scooter does come equipped with a front headlight, handlebar mounted turn signals, as well as a rear tail light. I would say that the headlight performance on this scooter is very average, and generally speaking with most scooters, the lighting isn't sufficient. But where this scooter does shine is it does include those turn signals that are at the ends of the handlebars. One thing that I would recommend in future iterations of this scooter, though, is going to be, some kind of tactile way to ensure that you are not covering the turn signals with your hands. The tail light is, very bright on this scooter, but looking at that headlight, I strongly recommend using a handlebar mounted light to provide not only more visibility in the forward direction, but to the sides. The next scooter we're going to look at is the NIU KQi 300X, which has a similar lighting setup to the Ninebot Max G2. It's got a front headlight, it's got handlebar mounted turn signals, as well as a rear tail light. Now, what's really nice about the KQi 300X is that they've got that signature halo light up front, which has got like a daytime running light with a strong headlight in the middle. So this scooter does provide pretty decent forward visibility with the headlight, but that ambient daytime running light also provides some visibility to the sides. It's not super strong, but it's almost enough. So with this scooter, I definitely recommend, a handlebar mounted light for additional visibility to the front and to the sides, but at least you get something more than just forward visibility. It's also got really nice turn signals on the handlebars, but they've got like a little rib or a raised area so that when you're holding onto those handlebars that you're not covering those turn signals, which is a really good design feature. And finally, you've got that tail light, which is also very bright, very easy to see at night. Now, last but definitely not least is going to be the Apollo Go. Now, this does have more advanced lighting setup than the other two scooters, but it does share some commonalities. It's got that front headlight, it's got the end cap style integrated turn signals in the handlebar, and it's also got the rear taillight brake light combo. Where it differs from the other scooters is going to be the fact that it's got rear turn signals integrated into that taillight, which are very visible at night. But Apollo, if you're listening, you gotta get it brighter so it's more visible during the daytime. I feel like with that kind of cloudy white plastic over the taillight, it kind of clouds out those turn signals. The end cap ones are still very visible, just in the back, not so bright. But where Apollo's master stroke is gonna be in its stem integrated lighting, which is absolutely insane and a game changer, and really, in my opinion, sets the standard for lighting on scooters. When you engage this, not only do you have, more than sufficient front visibility, but you have 180-degree visibility directly in front of you. So you can see exactly what's on the sides, to the left, to the right, as well as what's in front of you. And you can also use this light double click of that left mode button to turn it on and off to get people's attention. But absolutely solid lighting performance on the Apollo Go. I haven't seen anything like it from any other scooter in the market, especially in this segment. So definitely a game changer in my opinion. So in terms of lighting, the Apollo Go definitely takes the cake on this one, followed by the KQi 300X. Now, the next category that we're going to look at today is going to be the controls on the scooter, specifically the controls that turn on the headlights as well as change the speed modes. Now, I'm going to take a moment to pick on Segway, NIU, as well as every other company that does this, because if you read every instruction manual for scooters out there, they always say, always ride with two hands, don't take your hands off the handlebars because there could be instability and you can fall off. Yet NIU and Segway and several other companies out there have made the very interesting design choice to put that button directly on the screen, which forces you to remove your hand from the handlebar, which is a big no-no, to go turn on the headlights or to switch speed modes. Please, you've got to change that in future iterations of this scooter. Put a proper control pad on your scooters. The Apollo Go does it 100% correctly. All the controls for your scooter are within reach of your thumb, so you don't have to remove your hands, to turn on the headlights. You don't have to remove your hands to turn on the stem light. You don't have to remove your hands to change speed modes. It's all right there within distance of your thumbs. So would really like to see that from all scooters moving forward. I mean, I recently reviewed, the Coroma E68 Pro, which is a sub $400 scooter that's got a full-on control pad that allows me to engage cruise control, turn on the headlights, do all that fun stuff directly from a single control pad, no removing my hands. If we can do it on a sub $400 scooter, we can definitely do it on a $1,000 scooter. So it goes without saying that the winner in this particular category is going to be the Apollo Go, and of course our runner-ups will be the KQi 300X and the Ninebot Max G2. All right, so the next category that we're going to look at today is going to be fit and finish. Now, all three of these are very solid scooters. Two in particular, the Ninebot Max G2 and the Apollo Go, are built like tanks. They're predominantly metal construction. There's very little in the way of plastic on these scooters, so they definitely have a solid feel. The Apollo Go is probably going to be the most put together of all of them. And when I say put together, I mean this thing is like a precision operating machine. You know, when I ride that scooter, it is very smooth. It is very dialed in. I think the best comparison I can make is, you know, to riding a Lexus. Now, not all scooters are perfect, but this is as close to perfect as I could find in terms of fit and finish and just the overall smoothness of the ride. The Ninebot Max G2 is also very comfortable. It does have a little bit of play in the steering. I would say 1 to 2 millimeters in each direction. I think it's how the front hydraulic suspension is designed. So it definitely doesn't have that kind of like tight feeling that you have with the Apollo Go. And then when we look at the KQi 300X, it does incorporate more plastic into its construction, which isn't necessarily a problem, but you know, I live in the Phoenix metro area where it is quite hot. You know, we hit up to 118 degrees, you know, just a week and a half ago. And so there have been a couple occasions when I stood on the scooter and you can kind of hear that plastic creak a little bit, but that's just plastic mostly around the perimeter. It does, of course, have, you know, metal construction of the frame and everything. But in terms of, you know, steering, there's absolutely no play that I've been able to feel in that steering. So also very solid. So looking at overall fit and finish and construction and feel of the scooters, I would say the Apollo Go is definitely the winner in this category, followed closely by the Ninebot Max G2 and then the KQi 300X. So they're all solid options in my book. Next up is going to be the app experience. Now, all three of these scooters are app enabled, which is huge because that means you can fully customize the ride and set it to your specific preferences. So if you want to, you know, change acceleration strength, if you want to change top speed and some of the speed modes, if you want to change regenerative braking strength, you can do that with all three. Now, looking at the app experience overall, I would say that the class leader is definitely going to be the Ninebot Max G2. I think they overall have the most intuitive design. They do a really good job of explaining and pushing out firmware updates and what to expect in those changes, and it's also very easy to navigate around. The Apollo app is also a really good one. Apollo is actually updating the UI. My one recommendation to Apollo, though, is in the driving dashboard, the fonts need to be bigger. You know, I'm going on 37 years old. I've got these glasses. You know, I'm looking down at this screen, and some of those fonts are really small, specifically around the estimated range. And let's get that font size bigger so it's easier to see. The KQi 300X also has a fantastic app. Allows you to track a bunch of things, is also pretty intuitive. So I would say in this case, the class leader is definitely going to be the Ninebot Max G2 app. And then, of course, the runners-up, I think, equally are going to be the Apollo app and the KQi app. Also very, very good app experiences that those manufacturers are continually improving. Now, I don't know how many people are actually excited about this next category, but it's going to be around accessories, specifically around handlebar real estate. Now, if you want to attach things like, you know, third-party lights, phone holders, you know, speaker holders, whatever you want, you know, accessory bags, some of that handlebar real estate is going to be really important if you want to use those kind of things. Now, the Ninebot Max G2 has a ton of real estate, more so than any of the other scooters that we're looking at today. And so if you want to attach any of those things, you have ample space to do it. The KQi 300X does have some handlebar space, so if you want to attach like a handlebar extender, there's definitely enough room for that. But you're going to be hard-pressed to get, you know, a phone holder or an external light on there. And in order to do so, I would recommend removing that little wind guard because that'll free up some space on the handlebar. Probably the worst performer in this category is going to be the Apollo Go. They have very thick handlebars on that scooter. And so if you look at a lot of accessories, none of them have a large enough circumference to get around those handlebars. Now, Apollo does one really good thing, and they include a quad lock phone mounting system, which I have a quad lock, mount on my phone, and they also include one if you don't have that, which is really, really nice if you want to go mount those things. I don't use it as much because I'm riding around here in the blistering sun. I don't want my phone to like overheat and explode on me or anything like that. But in the winter time, absolutely, when it's cooler out, 100% use that. But it would be nice to see Apollo release a line of accessories that fit handlebars that size. Specifically a handlebar extender, because I have yet to find one that'll fit that. Now I know some users have been, been able to get some accessories on the actual rubber handlebar part, but makes my hands feel cramped. I'm not into that. So, Paul, if you're listening, come out with a handlebar extender. I think that'll solve most of those issues. So in terms of this category, the winner is going to be the Ninebot Max G2, followed closely by the KQi 300X. Now the next category that we're going to be looking at today is brake strength. So if you're looking at stopping in a hurry, you'll definitely want to pay attention here. Each of these scooters is braking a little bit differently. So for example, the KQi 300X uses dual disc brakes, so a disc brake in the front and a disc brake in the rear. Now generally speaking, disc brakes are going to have a lot more stopping power, a lot more bite when you actuate those brake levers than drum brakes are going to have. And they also incorporate electronic regenerative braking into the braking mechanism for this scooter. So in terms of sheer stopping power, the KQi 300X is going to be the way to go. Now the next scooter that we're going to look at is the Apollo Go. And the Apollo Go does leverage drum brakes, which generally speaking require less maintenance than their disc brake counterparts. The Go also leverages electronic as well as regenerative braking. But what separates the Go from the other two is that it's got a dedicated regenerative brake lever that doesn't use the drums at all. It just uses pure electronic braking, which, to be honest with you, I use that 95% of the time. When I first heard about that feature, I thought it was a little gimmicky, like, am I really going to be using that? Turns out I use it a lot, and that's my preferred way of braking. Now, if I need to stop in an especially urgent situation, of course, I will use the manual brakes, but for those gradual stops, the regenerative brake is actually exceptionally powerful for what it is. So very nice to see that on the Apollo Go. And the last scooter that we're going to look at is going to be the Ninebot Max G2, which has got a drum brake as well as regenerative and electronic braking. The one thing I don't like about the brakes on the Ninebot Max G2 is that you got to get out the toolkit to adjust those drum brakes. Whereas on the Apollo Go, for example, you just twist it with your thumb, you're good to go. The electronic regenerative braking, is very good. You can adjust it in the app just like the other scooters. So electronic braking is definitely on point. The drum, though, it's pretty weak. I will say that. So if you're just relying on the drum brake, it doesn't have as much stopping power as the other two scooters. But combined with the electronic brake has got more than sufficient stopping power. So in terms of brakes on these scooters, I would say the class leader here is gonna be the NIU KQi 300X, followed very closely by the Apollo Go. Alright, so the last category that we're going to look at today is going to be IP rating, which is the water and dust resistance rating. The Apollo Go does come out on top with an IP66 water resistance rating, meaning you're basically going to be able to go out and ride this in, rainy conditions, no issues at all whatsoever. It can withstand, powerful water jets for a certain period of time without any kind of water ingress. So really solid water resistance rating on the Go. Next up, and I think this is pretty much going to be a tie between the two, but the Ninebot Max G2 comes with an IPX5 water resistance rating, and then the NIU KQi 300X comes with an IP55 water resistance rating. So both of those, you shouldn't have any issues riding around in light rain. In fact, I rode the Ninebot Max G2 through an intense thunder rainstorm out here in Arizona last summer, and afterwards I didn't have any issues, and here we are almost a year later, no issues at all whatsoever. So if water resistance rating is going to be important for you, all of these three scooters offer solid ratings, but the Apollo Go definitely comes out on top. And if you are curious about UL certification, all three of these scooters are UL certified, which is absolutely huge because there are some places in the United States that are starting to require that higher level of testing for these scooters. So rest assured, all three are UL certified. All right, so if you are still with me, thank you so much for hanging out to the very end. That was my comparison of these three scooters, and as you can see, each of them has their own strengths and weaknesses. So which scooter is going to be appropriate for you depends on which of those factors is at the top of your list. But in my book, all three are solid options for, the general, scooter consumer. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns. Happy to answer those. And once again, if you are interested in purchasing one of those scooters, I will include affiliate links in the description as well as coupons below. And if you use those, they absolutely help support this channel. They keep the wheels turning on future reviews. So thank you in advance. And as always, thank you so much for tuning into Tom's Gadget Garage. We'll see you next time.